Can tell I'm about to pass out. I always get so. 1 minute. Good morning. A special meeting by video conference during disaster due to COVID-19 of the Board of Trustees of San Elizario I.S.D. held this May 20th, 2020 at 9 a.m. is now called to order. On March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic and video conference meeting in response to coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have quorum in attendance and this meeting by a telephone call and internet access. We are meeting by use of both telephone conference call, online access, and through use of an email link for questions. If a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the administration will read the comments in record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or telephone call, please follow instructions on the meeting notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseen difficulties and ask for the patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have any questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. We will now proceed with item 1B, roll call. Ms. Hawkins, please.
My bird just started. I'm sorry. Okay, so we have 4 members present, Ms. Sandra Licon, Michelle Garcia, Myrna Hernandez, and myself, Irene Jaques. Absent are Eduardo Chavez, Fernie Madrid, and Becky Romero.
Thank you, Ms. Jaques. We'll now proceed with item C, the Pledge of Allegiance. May we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you. Item 1D, San Elizario I.S.D. mission statement. San Elizario I.S.D's mission is to graduate students with skills to meet the demands of a changing world by promoting student success as non-negotiable, channeling resources to match the learning needs of students, employ and retain quality staff so that San Elizario is a proud, innovative, and academically superior district. Item 2, open forum. Ms. Christine?
Board Chair Ligon, we have no submissions at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we will now proceed then to item 3, new business, board action items. 3A, the board will co-lead a training with Mr. A.J. Crable on the Lone Star governance for the community. We'll begin with, good morning, everyone. We would like to welcome you to our first virtual interactive Lone Star governance co-led training for our community. Thank you for your time. We know that this is in these difficult times, you could be elsewhere doing other things, yet you have given us this opportunity to reach out to you. So thank you. The Board of Trustees as a team of 8 began this journey about 2 years ago. Since then, our board has changed 3 different times with new board members but not because our board members' change meant that our focus was not the same, and that is to improve our students' outcome. We individually had to change our behaviors, get out of our comfort zones, and dedicate and focus our time to fully and truly ensure that all our students succeed. As your elected board, we represent the vision and values of our community and are excited to have this two-way conversation with you all on our student outcome goals. How having these goals have changed the way the board functions, down to what our agendas look like and where we choose to spend our time. We will have some translations on this session in Spanish, but next week, Wednesday, May 20th, from 9 to 10:30, we will have a training in Spanish only. Les quiero compartir que este entrenamiento se llevará a cabo en inglés hoy, pero la semana que entra sí tendremos una sesión que viene siendo el miércoles 27 de mayo de 9 a 10:30. La sesión se dará en español. Okay, Mr. Horacio.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to the I.S.D. College Community Training for the Lone Star Governance Virtual Meeting. My name is Horacio Hernandez, and Elisario I.S.D. Technology Director, and I'll be the moderator for this meeting. For this meeting, WebEx Events platform is being used. The intention of this meeting is to inform and interact. Feel free to ask questions whenever a presenter is allowed. This video conferencing platform allows for two-way communication to happen in various ways. If you're joining us via video conferencing, the control bar is at your disposal. I'll be explaining in order from left to right. The number one button is the mute unmute button. Clicking on the microphone icon will mute in red or unmute in black your audio during this meeting. The second button is the stop video, my video. Click the camera icon to allow the host and other participants to see you. Off red and on is black. The next icon is a share content. Clicking on the upward pointing arrow will share your desktop, files, applications, websites, or videos. The next button is the participants. Clicking on the person icon will open the participants window. Here's where you can raise your hand if you have any questions. The next icon is the chat. Clicking on the comment bubble icon will open the chat window in the lower right side. You can chat with anyone in the meeting or hold a private discussion with any participant. The next icon is the more options. The more options icon, the three dots, allow you to copy the meeting information and configure your audio connections. The last icon is the leave meeting. Clicking on the red icon will close the meeting. Bienvenido a la capacitación comunitaria codirigida de I.S.D. para la Junta Virtual de Lone Star Governance. Mi nombre es Horacio Hernández, director de tecnología de San Elisario I.S.D. y seré el moderador de esta junta. Para esta junta, la plataforma de WebEx Events será usada. La intención de esta junta es de ser abierta e interactiva. Siéntase libre de hacer preguntas cuando los presentadores lo permitan. Esta plataforma de conferencia permite que la comunicación bidireccional suceda de varias maneras. Si está conectado a esta junta a través de videoconferencia, la barra de control aparece en su pantalla y le explicaré en orden de izquierda a derecha. El icono número 1 es el silencio no silencio. Al hacer clic en este icono del micrófono, silencio rojo, no silencio negro, su audio durante la reunión. El siguiente icono es iniciar, apagar video. Haga clic en el icono de la cámara para permitir que el anfitrión y otros participantes lo vean. Cámara apagada será en rojo, cámara encendida estará en negro. El siguiente icono es compartir contenido. Al hacer clic en esta flecha hacia arriba, se compartirá su escritorio, archivos, aplicaciones, sitios web o videos. El siguiente icono son participantes. Al hacer clic en este icono de la persona, se abrirá la ventana de participantes. Aquí puede usar el icono de la mano. El siguiente icono es el chat. Al hacer clic en el icono de burbuja de comentarios, se abrirá la ventana de chat en la parte inferior derecha. Puede chatear con cualquier persona en la reunión o mantener conversaciones privadas con cualquier participante. El siguiente icono es más opciones. El icono más opciones, distinguido por 3 puntos, le permite copiar la información de la reunión y configurar sus conexiones de audio. El último icono es abandonar la reunión. Al hacer clic en el icono rojo, se cerrará la reunión. Si usted está conectado a través de teleconferencia, los micrófonos se abrirán durante las sesiones de preguntas y respuestas. Muchas gracias por participar.
Good morning, I'm Trustee Garcia, and I'm going to tell you some of the objectives that we will be learning today. Parents and community members will understand the goals that the board has adopted, the role that the board plays in accomplishing these goals. And now I'm going to introduce our special guest, Mr. A.J. Crabbill, Lone Star Governance Coach.
Good morning. Well, thank you all for having me. It's always a pleasure to get to join the board, administration, families, and community. And anytime you all have reached out, it's always been incredibly welcoming, and so it's always good to return. Today, we're going to do this training in two major parts. I'll lead the first part, and some of the board members and the coach will lead the second part. But the intention of our time together today is really to just get a better understanding as a community, people who live, work, worship, and play in the community and have an investment in the success of the students in the community. Today's really opportunity for all of us to come together and just spend some time understanding what is it that what is the work of the school board, and what have they, what goals have they adopted, and what is the role that they play in making sure that those goals come to pass. And so this will be an open conversation. Anytime you want to engage in the conversation, um, just raise your hand or type something into the chat box, and we'll respond to that. You can stop me at any time when you have questions. You don't have to wait for the appropriate time. This session is intended for you, and not intended for me. Um, in addition, there are going to be times when I ask you all questions, as I'm going to do here in a moment. And so anytime I ask a question, anyone who's here, panelists, participants, whomever, is welcome to respond to the questions. That way we keep it open conversation. Any questions people have about what we're doing or how we'll operate today before I get started? Any questions? All right. And if we could head to next slide. All of this work that we're going to do today is grounded in one common belief: that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. That if we want something great for our children, it starts with us as the adults changing our behaviors in ways that better help our children get the things that we want for them. That is the underlying premise behind all of our work that we'll do today, and it really stands behind the work that the board does week in and week out. And understanding, as you heard them describe earlier, that if we want our students to be able to perform better, we've got to figure out what do we have to change as board members to give them the support they need to perform better. And that has to be true for the board, and for the superintendent, and for staff, and for everyone throughout the community. And student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. And so our conversation today will be grounded in that idea. As a way to access, as a way to understand what we mean by that, if I am hungry, what is the outcome that I want? If I am hungry, what's the result? What's the outcome that I want? Feel free to either speak out loud or you can type into the chat box. But this is a question for everyone. I don't even know if there's a way if we could elevate the people who are connected as participants rather than as attendees, rather than panelists, so that I can call on them as well. But my first question is, if I'm hungry, what's the outcome that I want? What's the result I want?
To feel full,
Fed. To be fed. To be good.
to feel full,
You feel full, be fed,
Satisfied.
be satisfied. Yeah. If I, yeah, to feel full. If I am, if I'm hungry, why is having food not the outcome that I want? If I'm hungry, why is having food not the outcome that I want? Um, and Adira, if you're speaking, for some reason I can't hear you. So I need to make, what'd you say? So the question again is, if I'm hungry, why is having food not the outcome I want? Anyone?
Because having food doesn't mean you're going to eat it, and it's not going to fulfill your hunger.
Yeah. If I'm hungry, simply having food. You can go back one slide. Yeah. Right here. Yeah. If I'm hungry, simply having food doesn't guarantee that I'm going to feel full. Got it. If I'm hungry, why is having money not the outcome I want?
You need security more. It's not just a short-term process, it's a long-term.
It's money is kind of the short-term thing I need, but I would use that to get the long-term thing I need. But having the money doesn't actually make me feel full. Like I'm not going to eat the money. Like a whole bunch of people have touched that, and they probably definitely have the Rona. So yeah, just having the money isn't going to give me uh, the outcome I want. If I'm hungry, why is going to a restaurant not the outcome that I want?
The same thing, it's short-term.
Yeah, it's a step in the process. It's an input, but it's not actually the outcome I want. And that's the key difference here, is that having money, having food, being at a restaurant, being at a grocery store, all of these are inputs. They're at the beginning of the process, and I would do those hoping to get the outcome I want. But just because I have money doesn't mean I feel full, and just because I have food doesn't mean I feel full, and just because I'm at the restaurant or at the grocery store doesn't mean I feel full. They're inputs. They're strategies that we use to try to get the outcome we need. And so there are inputs, the strategies we're using to try to get the outcomes we want. And then there's the outcome, which is the actual result we want. Inputs and outcomes. Why do you think it's important? Today we're having a conversation about how the school board serves children. Why do you think it's important to know the difference between an input and an outcome? Why might that be important?
we need to know the opinions of our constituents. We can better help them.
Yeah, so the opinions of our constituents, are those inputs or outcomes?
Their inputs.
Yeah, those are inputs. It's important information at the beginning of the process. It's part of the strategy we use to help serve children, is we listen to our community and get their input and get their feedback. But just because I've listened to the community, does that mean my children now have the education I want? No.
No.
That doesn't mean we have the outcome yet. We've got the inputs. Those happen at the beginning of the process, but that doesn't yet mean we have the outcomes. We won't know those till the end of the process. We've got inputs and out. Anyone else? Why is it important? We're talking about how the board serves children and helps improve education for children in the community. Why might it be important to be able to know the difference between inputs and outcomes? Anyone else? Why might that be important?
The inputs are the resources that will help you achieve the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, the inputs are the resources that help you achieve the outcome. You need the inputs. Or are we saying that the inputs are unimportant?
No. No.
Not at all. We're just saying they're different than the outcomes. They're the resources, the strategies you use to achieve the outcomes you want. So let's. So I'm hungry. Let's think this through. Maybe in order to uh, stop being hungry, the strategy I'm going to use is bean and cheese burrito. So if that's a strategy I'm going to use, what are some of the inputs I need to implement that strategy? What are some of the inputs I need to implement my bean and cheese burrito strategy?
You need the beans, the burrito,
Tortillas,
the tortilla,
Yes.
the cheese.
Okay, so
the stove.
yeah. No, nobody wants a plate.
You need a cook. You need your abuelita.
It's plate or aluminum foil.
Wrap the burrito,
Yeah, something to help pick it up with. Yeah, don't want to burn your fingers. Got to safety first, people. Safety first.
You need a facilitator like your abuelita.
My brother to come tell me how to make it happen. Yeah, so all of these are inputs. And we use all of those inputs to make my bean and cheese burrito, and then I use that to try to feel full. That's the inputs that help lead to the outcomes. Now, if I have the absolute best beans in the county, does that mean that now I'm going to feel full?
No.
If I have the cheesiest cheese in the county, does that mean that definitely now I'm going to feel full?
No.
It'd be valuable to have those things, but you could know everything there is to know about the inputs. None of that guarantees that I'm going to feel full at the end. None of that guarantees that I'm going to get the outcome I want. And so the inputs are important, they're necessary, but they don't guarantee the outcome. This is important to reflect on because often what happens is the boards that mean well for children but don't necessarily know how to do well will spend all of their time focused on the inputs. Well, is the cheese the right cheese? Do we buy the beans from the right location? Are they seasoned properly? We'll spend all of our time on the inputs and not any time focusing on, did we actually get the outcomes we wanted for children? One key step in understanding how boards serve students is you've got to be able to distinguish between the inputs and the outcomes. Okay, so we talked about me being hungry, but let's bring this more into a school example. So let's imagine I've got a classroom of third graders. I've got 26 third graders, and the outcome I want for them is to feel full. And I want to use the same bean and cheese burrito strategy for them that I was using for myself. But as their teacher, I don't want to wait until the end of the process to figure out if my strategy is on track. What are some things I can measure in the middle of my bean and cheese burrito strategy? What are some things I can measure in the middle to help me get a sense of whether or not this strategy is likely to work at the end? What are the things I can measure in the middle to see if my strategy is on track?
Ask them if they're full already or if they're still hungry.
Yeah, so one thing I can do in the middle is I can ask them, hey, little AJ, did that one burrito fill you up? He's like, no, that did not. I'm gonna need at least 2 more of those. And so I can have that conversation, and we can find out, how full they are. Who else? What are other things I can measure in the middle of this process to see if it's likely to have all my students feel full at the end? What are things I can measure in the middle?
The amount that they need?
Yeah, I can measure how much they need versus how much I have. I've got 26 third graders, but if I only have 20 burritos, this may not work out well. And so I can measure how many do I have left. So maybe I give all of them a half of one to begin with. And so Now I've got, a little bit left, but not enough for everybody to have a second half. I can measure how much I have available and figure out, is this likely to work out? Or did I, instead of needing 20, did I really need 30 in order to feed all 26 of them? Yeah, so this is something I can measure in the middle. These measures in the middle of the process we refer to as outputs. Inputs are knowable at the beginning of the process, and they really describe what are the resources that we're using to try to get the outcomes we want. Outputs are knowable in the middle of the process, and they describe, how well are we doing? Well, what are the measurements that tell us, are we on track to the outcomes we want? And then the outcomes are knowable at the end of the process, and they tell us, did we get the result we wanted or not? Inputs, outputs, outcomes. As you can see on the next slide, inputs are resources deployed at the beginning of the process. Outputs are measures that we look at in the middle of the process to see if we're on track. And outcomes are the results at the end of the process. Inputs, outputs, outcomes. So now that we've talked about it in my classroom example, let's take it to a school example. What are examples of inputs in a school system? What are examples of resources and activities that we know at the beginning of the school year? What are examples of inputs in a school system?
Books.
Books are an input, yeah.
A bell schedule.
Yeah, bell schedule is an input. Other examples of inputs in a school system. What are resources or activities that we know about at the beginning of the school year? What are other inputs in a school system?
Teachers.
The teachers.
Teachers, the most important input that a school system has is its teachers. If you have effective teachers, then what is possible for your students just continues to grow and grow and grow. If you don't, if you do everything else perfectly, but you don't make sure that you've got great teachers and that they have the support they need, then all of the other inputs are probably not going to save you. The single most important element that school systems control in terms of improving student outcomes is quality of instruction. And that largely comes down to the effectiveness of your teachers. Other inputs in a school system. All right, what are examples of outputs in a school system? What are measurements of how the investments are working in the middle of the cycle? What are outputs in a school system?
Testing.
Yeah, so maybe the teacher is giving a quiz or gives an end of unit test, and then you can see in the middle of the school year, in the middle of the cycle, how are we doing? Yeah, what are other examples of outputs in a school system?
Class discussions.
Yeah, so the teacher can actually measure, did little AJ actually participate in the discussion or not? Was their participation, were they actually engaged? Yeah, what are other examples of outputs in a school
What
system?
data collected?
Yeah, there's a lot of data collected in schools. Data around food service, data around attendance, data around discipline, data around grades. A lot of this data that's collected in school, we refer to most of that as outputs. These are measures in the middle of the school year, the middle of the cycle, to give us some type of insight into how well our investments into public education are working. So those are inputs and outputs in a school system. What are examples of outcomes in a school system? What are examples of outcomes? Measures of results at the end of the school year. What are outcomes in a school
The
system?
results of the testing.
Yeah, so we have some tests at the end of the year that tell us the results for the entire year. How did students do from the beginning of the year to right now? Yeah, what are other examples of outcomes in a school system?
Graduation.
Graduation, it could be an outcome. Other examples of outcomes in a school system?
Attention of students.
Yeah, so we can measure student engagement at the end of the year, figure out how engaged, how attentive were they throughout the school year. Absolutely. So these are inputs, outputs, outcomes. Inputs, outputs, outcomes. However, as you look on the next slide, we don't actually talk about all of these. We talk about two things in particular. We talk about student outcomes, and we talk about the adult behaviors, the adult inputs that gets us those student outcomes. So what this starts to lift up is that there are actually two different types of outcomes that a school system creates. There are student outcomes, and then there's all the other outcomes that a school system creates that aren't student outcomes. I generally think of them as adult outcomes. What do you think is the difference between a student outcome and any other outcome that a school system creates? What's the difference between, no, don't go here yet. Go back one, we're not ready yet. What's the difference between the student outcomes and the other outcomes that a school system creates?
They measure what a student has achieved.
Yeah, so student outcomes measure what a student has achieved. So what do the other outcomes measure?
Maybe efficiency on the staff or the programs that we have.
Yeah, it could be about efficiency of staff, programs. Yeah, where student outcomes are measuring what students have achieved. The other outcomes are measuring what adults have achieved. Absolutely. What else? Any other differences between student outcomes and all the other outcomes that a school system creates?
Parent participation?
Is that a student outcome or another outcome? Mute that. But yeah, so what are other examples of differences between student outcomes and all the other outcomes that a school system creates? Any other ideas? So the first idea was that student outcomes are really about the things that students have achieved, whereas the other outcomes are really about what the adults have achieved. Absolutely. Any other ideas about the difference between a student outcome and all the other outcomes? All right, then let's go on to the next slide, which actually pretty much says exactly what you already described. Is that when we think about student outcomes, these are the results the school systems created that measure what students know and are able to do. And the other outcomes is basically everything else that the school system accomplishes that's not that. Everything else all the other results that the school system creates that aren't student results, and those are all the other outcomes. Why is it important to be able to tell the difference between a student outcome and all the other outcomes? Why is this important?
They're not the same. The differences are, vast.
Yeah, they're definitely not the same. But if we're not careful, often what happens is people act as if they're the same thing. And boards can unintentionally start thinking that they're focusing on student outcomes when really they're focused on other outcomes. Yeah. Why else? Why is it important, do you think, for board members and community members to be able to tell the difference between a student outcome and another outcome? Why might that be important?
Measured different, they can have different results.
Yeah. So these are very different types of results. How you're going to measure them is going to be different, and how much you want to focus on one or the other is going to be different because they're different types of results. Absolutely.
I think too, it might be a situation where it becomes more of a focus on the adults as to opposed to what should really be happening in schools, which is the focus on the students.
Yeah, if you can't tell the difference between student outcomes and other outcomes, then you don't know, you don't have a way of knowing, are we actually focused on what we're ultimately trying to create for children, or are we unintentionally focused exclusively on what we're trying to create for adults? This isn't a suggestion that the other outcomes are unimportant. In fact, you need the other outcomes in order to get you to outcomes. But the reason a school system exists isn't to improve other outcomes. Why do school systems exist?
To improve student outcomes.
The
This is
student
the
of.
only reason school systems exist. The only reason school systems exist is to cause improvements in student outcomes. That's it. That is the only reason for which school systems exist, and nothing else. So do school systems exist to have balanced budgets?
No.
Great football stadiums. It's Texas, obviously they exist to have great football stadiums. Yes, yes.
No. Even though I'm a football fan, no.
But new cheerleading uniforms. They clearly exist to have new cheerleading uniforms. Yes.
No.
Okay, well, we're in COVID, so obviously school systems exist to make sure that students get fed, right? That's why they exist, right?
No.
No, so you're opposed to feeding children now?
Bean and cheese burritos.
Cranking out the bean and cheese burritos. Yeah, it's not that those things are unimportant. It's just that for the board to be effective at serving students, board members in the community have to be clear that the reason the school system exists isn't to generate all of the other outcomes. It's to create improvements in student outcomes. That everything else has to happen. We want to feed students, we want balanced budgets, we want appropriate athletic facilities, we want all of these things. But we want them only in so much as they help us improve outcomes for students. And if they're actually not working toward that end, then the board, as part of protecting and caring for children, has to ask the question, are we focused on the right things? Are we focused on, is this actually helping us accomplish the outcomes for students that we want? And everything the board does, it's got to constantly be saying the reason we exist as a school system is to improve outcomes for our students, to really make possible for our young people the aspirations we have for them as parents and families and community members. But that has to be the central focus, the central obsessive core of everything that we do as a school system is to improve the outcomes for our students. And recognize that the other outcomes are important, but they are a means to an end. And the end is, are we actually improving student outcomes? But this brings us right back to the very next question on the next slide, which is if we say that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, then it starts to beg the question, what is it? What specific adult behaviors can boards engage in that have the largest impact on improving student outcomes? It's not enough to say that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. We have to then be more specific. What specific behaviors can the board engage in that help change outcomes, that help improve outcomes for students? The first answer to that is that the board has to get really clear about which outcomes are we trying to change in the first place. But before we can talk about improving student outcomes, we first have to be clear about which student outcomes we want to improve. What are some examples of student outcomes? What are some examples of student outcomes?
How well they excelled.
Yeah, how well they excelled. So we can look at student growth at the end of the year, and it tells us, did they grow at least one grade level during this year? Or maybe our teachers just knocked it out of the park and they grew 1.5 grade levels this year. Like they were just so much better prepared than we even expected. And so we can look at student growth over the course of the entire year. That's an example of a student outcome. What are other examples of student outcomes?
How many of our students graduated and were college and career ready?
Not merely how many of them graduated, but what I heard you say is how many of them graduated college and career ready, that they were really ready for whatever that next level of opportunity or that next level of learning is for them. Yeah, absolutely. And so we have ways of measuring, are they college and career ready? And that could be a student outcome. And so there could be a lot of different possible outcomes. But for the adult behavior change that the board has to engage in, the first step that they need to take to really ensure that they're protecting the interests of the children in the community is they've got to be more specific about which student outcomes we're talking about. And so when we think about getting specific, we frequently rely on the saying that's used, the acronym that's used in education all the time. about goals being SMART. Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they attainable? Are they results focused? Are they time bound? When the board is talking about which student outcomes we want to focus on, the board's got to get really specific about that. In order to have the goals that boards are focused on be SMART, we say there are 4 key criteria that these goals need to have. On the next slide, you see the 4 criteria. That the baseline, what is the starting point? You know, what percentage of students can do this now? The target, and what's the end point? What percentage of students will be able to do this in the future? The population, which group of students are we talking about? And the deadline, by when will all of this occur? And so in order to go from just a regular student outcome to having it really be a goal about student outcomes, so that we can really be clear about which outcomes we try to impact, the board will add a baseline, a target, a population, and a deadline. Once they've done that, then they actually begin to have goals that look SMART. In a moment, we'll look at some actual examples of goals that are SMART, so you can see what that looks like. But before we step into that, I want to clarify on this point. The part of the challenge is that in any size community, there are going to be a bunch of different ideas about which one of these SMART goals should we focus on. How does the board decide which SMART goals to focus on? Of all the potential goals about student outcomes that the board could possibly focus on, how do they know which one to focus on?
Well, now I know with HB3, there has to be a specific focus, but I think before then, wherever I guess we're lacking the most need.
Yeah, so maybe some of it might be statutorily defined, like in a House Bill 3, but some of it's about how much, what are the needs of students. Rogelio says that there's got to be some type of needs assessment where we're actually looking at the data about what students know and are able to do right now, and set SMART goals about what they should be able to do in the future. All of this gets to a fundamental question, which we ask on the next slide, which is, why do school boards exist? And inside of this work, the key reason that school boards exist, the reason the school system exists, is to improve student outcomes. The key work of the boards, why school boards exist, is that they represent the vision and values of the community. School boards represent the vision and values of the community. They listen to the community. And they listen for what is our collective vision for our children. And so there are all these different possible student outcome goals that the board could choose. And we've identified these largely based on the data and the needs assessment, but deciding which of all of these makes the most sense means not only listening to the data, but also listening to the community. This is why boards exist, is they serve as the representatives to the school district of the vision and values of the community. And so as these goals are being created, the 2 key sources of information, there's the student needs data, and usually the superintendent and staff produce that, and then community feedback that the board members have an obligation to go out and listen for. This is the key work of boards and why they exist, because boards represent the vision and values of the community. So now that we've got an idea of what it is that boards need to do, they need to identify goals, and how they do it. They look at data, and they represent the vision and values of the community. Now we're ready. Let's look at an actual example of one of the goals. So on the next slide, we actually see one, and I actually just want to invite board members, since these are your actual goals, from the data that you looked at for your students and the listening that you've done in the community. I really want to invite the board members, if you could walk us through these goals, lift up for us, what's the baseline, what's the target, what's the population, and what's the deadline? so that folks can be clear that you've actually done the important work here. Who will take goal number 1?
The goals to everybody.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, someone, well, one of the board members go ahead and share goal number 1. And then after you shared it for us, let us know what's the baseline, what's the target, what's the population, what's the deadline.
Okay. So for our goal number 1, it focuses on mathematics, and it is students in 3rd grade mathematics through Algebra 1 performing at master's level on STAR/EOC will increase from 90% in June 2018 to 38% by June 2024.
So what's the baseline?
The baseline is 19%.
So that means so that means as of June 2018, about 19%, about 1 in 5 students were performing at the master's level on the state assessments, 3rd grade through usually 9th or 10th grade. Okay, so that's the baseline. So that's where you started. So about 1 in 5 of our students could do this at the master's level. It is really high level of performance. About 1 in 5 were at this really high level of performance in June of 2018. What's the target?
38%.
And so what the board here is saying is that by June of 2024, we almost want to double that to 2 out of 5 of our students being able to perform in mathematics at this really high level of achievement, this master's level of achievement. What's the population? Which student groups are we talking about?
3rd grade through algebra. Well, 3rd grade, I'm sorry.
So it definitely starts with 3rd grade. It goes through Algebra 1, as you said.
Through algebra 1.
It's usually Algebra 1 is sometimes it's taken in 7th and 8th grade, but often it's taken in 9th grade. Sometimes if students need a little more support, it might be 10th grade. But generally, 3rd through 9th or 10th grade. And what is the deadline? By when will this all happen?
June 2024.
Why is it important to have a deadline? Why does that matter?
Because it gives us, it sets a date that we know we need to be at that percentage by that time, because if not, then we're just going to, just keep going without it having, the results we want.
Yeah, this is a way of holding all of us as the adults accountable for are we making the progress that we want over time? Okay, so it says 38%. Why doesn't it say 100%?
It's unrealistic.
Why does it have to be realistic?
Because it's something that it has to be an attainable goal. It can't be something that we know it probably won't happen.
What's the harm if boards create completely unattainable goals? What harm might that cause?
We might not be able to reach them ever.
So certainly one potential harm is you can't reach it. What other ideas? What harm might it create if the board adopts goals that are just completely unattainable?
It's more pressure on students and teachers.
And teachers.
That puts unrealistic pressure on students and teachers. Absolutely. Yeah. What you want for staff is to say, we're going to stretch ourselves. We're going to work really hard for students, and we're going to push ourselves a little bit harder, this year than we did last year. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to burn out our staff by trying to have them accomplish something that they can't. I think they say the average person can run 11 miles an hour. And so saying, hey, you know what? This year we ran at 11 miles an hour. Next year we want to run at 11.2 miles per hour. We're going to push ourselves a little bit. That seems attainable. But saying, hey, last year we ran at 11 miles an hour. Next year, expect all of you to run 40 miles an hour. How many of you teachers can run 40 miles an hour? And so having unrealistic goals that are just simply unattainable in that defined time period will generally have the effect of really discouraging children and discouraging the staff who are supporting the children. And so it's important. What we want is to constantly see that improve, but we also want to be strategic about saying how much improvement can we have for this time period, and then come June 2024, when we hit 38%, are we still going to be satisfied with 38%? No. So then June 2024, now that we've nearly doubled it to 38%, now we're going to say, okay, what's next? And what's next? And what's next? Absolutely. And not nearly double it, actually double it. And maybe over the next 5 years, figure out, can we double it again? Like we doubled it from 18 to 24. Can we double it? Can we double it again over the next 5 years? By 2029. Any other questions or comments about this first goal? And particularly board members, anything to jump out to you or anything you want to say about this first goal? Why does this one matter to you? Why does it matter to you if your students, can perform at a high level on math? Why do you care?
I think raising our expectations because children will perform.
Yeah, this is about setting high expectations because our children, when we set high expectations for them and give our staff the support they need, what we know is that our children can and will perform. Absolutely.
And in these goals, it's just to support those gaps that they're having. We have to make sure that we support them in those gaps.
Yeah. All right, so that's goal number 1. And again, this gives us a great example of a baseline, 19%, a target, 38%, and a deadline, June 2024, and the population are 3rd graders through 9th graders. So this is goal number 1. Let's look at 2 more examples before we move on. Who will walk us through goal number 2 on the next slide?
Students in 3rd grade reading through English performing at master's level on STAR BOC will increase from 10% in June 2018 to 30% by June 2024.
Yeah. Why is that board members, when you adopted that, why is that goal important to you?
And because we were seeing that our children were struggling in reading, and
It's fundamental to their
it
learning.
is the baseline to any, yes.
Who cares if kid can read? Why is that important? I mean, can't they just click on YouTube now? Why do kids need to be able to read? I don't understand.
They need well, you need to be able to read to be able to look for that YouTube video.
Anyone else? Why was reading so important to you? Why'd you all choose to focus on students' ability to master reading? Anyone else?
Well, like someone mentioned already, a fundamental, it's a fundamental skill that will help you in other areas, not just English.
Yeah.
Math needs it, social studies, all other areas.
Life needs it.
Life needs it, yeah, no doubt. All right, and then you all adopted a 3rd goal. Who will share the 3rd goal with us on the next slide?
Goal 3 is students graduating college, career, and military ready will increase from 65% in June 2018 to 81% by June 2024.
Why is that one important to you?
Because we want our kids to be able to graduate college and career and military ready.
Why?
We need to know this, this is an important goal because we need to know that we're meeting those percentages by that time because we want our kids to succeed.
Anyone else? Why is this one important to you?
They have to be prepared for the real world.
Yes.
We want to see them, like Ms. Hernandez said, excel and do everything that they can to be successful and
And
all
every, because not all kids will end up going to college. Some will end up with careers or in the military. So you need to make sure that you want to have them prepared for anything out there in the real world, like they said.
Yeah, if they're prepared for all 3 of these, then they get to choose which of the 3 they do next. Yeah. Now, looking at the 3 goals the board's adopted, these 3 student outcome goals, I noticed that there's not something in here around having a balanced budget. Do you all just not care about budgeting? Like, the taxpayers are important too. Why don't you have a goal about budget?
Of course we care, but that's where that's an adult convenience.
Our focus
Um,
is on students, their
Yeah,
outcomes.
our student focus.
Yeah, so when we say goals, goals in a school system are about why the school system exists. And why do school systems exist again?
For our students.
For the students.
Yeah, to improve
To educate our
outcomes.
students, yeah.
And so goals describe what is the next slice of success we plan to create relative to where we exist. If we exist to improve student outcomes, what's the next slice of student outcomes we plan to improve? And it doesn't mean that the other outcomes are unimportant. It just means they're not the goal. Like, the district doesn't exist to have a balanced budget. It exists to improve student outcomes. And so our goals are about why we exist. Now there's another mechanism that we won't get into in this training because we're just limited on time, where the board does define what, how do we accomplish, what are the values that we have to protect? And maybe those values are around budgeting, and maybe they're around athletics and arts programming and all these other things. But that's a separate conversation from the conversation about our goals. Goals describe what is the next layer of improvement we're going to make toward the reason we exist. And if the reason we exist is to improve student outcomes, that means all of our goals need to be specifically about student outcomes, which is the case with all 3 of yours. It doesn't mean that the board doesn't pay attention to the other outcomes. You just have another system for doing that. That way you make the main thing, student outcomes improvement, you make the main thing the main thing. Our goals are about the reason we exist. They're about student outcomes. We still attend to the other outcomes. We just have another system for that. That way we don't accidentally make the mistake of thinking that the other outcomes are the goal. They're not, they're the means to the goal. That's different. Take a quick, hold on for a second. What questions, comments do you have so far in this conversation? What questions or comments do you have so far in this conversation?
I think there's a
A
question.
parent's question.
Yes.
Okay,
So
I can't see the chat box. What did it say?
one of the questions from the community members is, how do you calculate the percentage for those goals? How do you calculate the targets? ¿Cómo se calcula el porcentaje de las metas?
So we take
Through the
really
state
enjoyed this question.
accountability data.
This is a great question from whichever community member or parent asked it, about how do we calculate the targets. And so what I heard, I can tell that as a superintendent or board member saying that we're looking at state assessment data.
Accountability data provided by the superintendent and the cabinet to the board. And based on that, the percentages are made.
Other questions or comments at this point?
Yes. How were the goals selected?
Yeah, great question. Does someone want to speak to how were the goals selected? So there are like 20, 30 different things that you could have possibly selected as goals. And somehow you narrowed all that down to these 3. What were some of the key things that caused you to choose these 3 rather than any of the others that you could have chosen?
I do believe that it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Jaques and Ms. Licon, but I do believe that those were the areas where there needed to be improvement.
So part of this was looking at the student performance data to figure out where are our students not yet where we want them to be, that we really want to see improvement at. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. Anyone else? Any other key factors that you were looking at in making a decision that you really wanted to focus in on these goals as opposed to any of the others that you could have chosen? Did you all do any community engagement around this?
Definitely community engagement was involved. So we had more than 3 And we narrowed it down to these three.
What did community engagement for you all look like?
They were scheduled during the day and the afternoon to make sure that parents were able to come in and give their input, both in English and Spanish, so we could involve even a greater amount of our community members.
And we also took it to the schools. We included our staff. We did runs in the campuses and by grade levels as well. Well, not grade levels, but by campuses, and got their input as well from the teachers.
All right. Any other questions? Questions about the goals? Any other reflections on this part? Then I want to hand the baton of leadership for this training over for the next part of it. To finish out this part, any additional questions that or conversation needs to be had about the goals, and then to transition us into the next part. Mr. Hernandez, are you taking it from here?
I believe that's Ms. Licon, Mrs. Licon.
We will move on to the next slide, which is the agenda evaluation. Before we took on the LSG journey, our agendas looked very differently, and our focus was completely different. We were discussing the painting of a building, the color palettes, color of uniforms. And doing this journey and through this LSG journey, we truly focused on what was important, and that was our students. So beginning with our general functions, that the agenda, we have to go through different things that are required by law. And if you see here, general functions, this is required by law. We do have roll call, and this is to establish a quorum. We do need a quorum so we can vote on items. And very important for us as board members is to have the San Elizario I.S.D. mission statement. Again, because this is the vision and value that we have in our district. And if we continue to the next slide, the open forum. The open forum is also required by law, and people would have to sign in for that one. People would have to sign in, and we can't actually answer our community, but we can listen. We can listen to anything that they would like to say to us. Number 3, the recognition and student progress on student outcome goals. This one, board members, do you all believe that this focuses on or community? Do you believe this focuses on our student outcome goals? Item 3. Yes, it does. It does. And see, we recognize our students that are achieving their student outcome goals. As before, we used to recognize all the athletics and academics or the UIL competitions, and that hasn't changed. We don't do it during a board meeting. What we've done is that we take it out, and we actually, prior to the COVID, to this whole pandemic, we were going to the campuses or wherever our children were being recognized, and we would have their celebrations there and be with them one-to-one, and our students could be within their own students, with their own peers, and fill in their own element. So yes, item 3 is focused on student outcome goals. And item 4, the consent agenda. This is a one vote for all of them. This one is where all our board members really have to do their work. If they have any questions, they can ask the superintendent on them. They need more information, data, they would ask our superintendent. And the only reason that these items, like the financial reports, the MOUs for local entities, these we again prefer to spend most of our time on student outcome goals. So if we can ask questions prior to the meeting, it would, we wouldn't spend so much time on this, but it is a one item vote. If we can switch it real quick to the next slide. Real quick, item 4D and 4E, monitoring board self-constraints, the superintendent constraints. these are things that the constraints are things that we will not engage in as board. Those are things that we're not allowed, we don't allow ourselves to do. We as a board have three different constraints. We have three constraints. One being that the board members will not deviate from the board's operating procedures, particularly related to protocol of communication. Two, the board will not deviate from the agenda once it is set 72 hours in advance. And three, the board will not be distracted from investing at least 50% of its time each month on setting and monitoring student outcome goals. And, those are constraints for us, again, to maintain the focus on our students. If we are not adhering by it, then this is where we would discuss it. But those we do end up having to we've been very good about it, so we haven't really had to discuss them outside of the consent agenda, but consent agenda is a one vote. Okay, next item. Next slide. Okay, new business board action items. Again, this item, board members, if you want to discuss this one, I know that we are focused completely on student outcome goals. And here we do have what our yearly targets are. These are presentations, if you notice, like the goal progress monitoring, GPM 1.1. This is where our administrators, our associate superintendent will come give presentations to our board members. And they literally give us our target, the baseline target, population, where we are, where we need to be, what is taking place in order to meet those expectations. And granted, we are at a master's level, but we're seeing many gains in our meets area as well. And this is wonderful because again, you see how the support goes from the teacher to the teacher to the student, the PNI to our teachers, the administrators to our PNI, our teachers, and our superintendent to the leadership team. So again, this is where we do see how it takes everyone, again, to improve our student outcomes. Any questions here? Or if anybody wants to chime in, please.
We'll make a comment here. I think that having our goals constantly viewed at each meeting keeps our finger on that goal, that we don't deviate to other things, that what the main focus is. And I've enjoyed this change in our agenda.
Thank you. Absolutely,
Me
absolutely.
too, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
And where, we can provide additional support should it not be, getting to our goal, the goal that we want. So it's monitoring and helping us understand and better support our teachers and our superintendent and everybody else.
Excellent, excellent. Next slide, please. On item 5B, consider impossible board action to schedule special meeting for the budget workshop or the budget adoption. This is a necessary item, but it's not directly about our student outcomes. So we do have it, in this area, but again, our focus is to, to improve our student outcomes. And item C, reports, information, and presentation. This one again is just where we are given any information. We do our homework, we read the information. We don't have any questions. We proceed on the next item because we had spent enough time on the other items. Next slide, please. Leadership evaluation and board self-evaluation. This is probably our favorite, well, my favorite one, because this is where we really check to see where we're investing most of our time. If we truly are focused, like we say, on our students' outcomes, and it makes us accountable for all our our actions and actions, and where we're investing our time. And we do. We've very proud to say that, just like You know, our principals evaluate our teachers, our superintendent evaluates our principals, the board evaluates our superintendent, we self-evaluate. And this has to be by far one of our favorite ones, because I do see that this board and our boards prior to this had been very focused on our students. Where we started prior to the I.S.D. to where we are now, major leaps. So
It holds us accountable. It holds us accountable on focusing our majority of the time on our students, and that's important to our community, the students.
Mhm. It is, and we're adhering to our constraint as well. You know that we are investing 50% of time, of which most of the time we're surpassing the 50%. So, good job, board members. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? Oh, I'm liking this where everybody shares. This is much easier. I like this. Okay, no, okay. So next slide, please. And the executive session. Again, this is required by law, and this is where we do have where we go in the executive session. It is to maintain the privacy of anyone that would be needed to be discussed. No action is taken out there in there. We discuss, then come back. Next slide, please. We do come back, and this is where the board returns to open session to take possible action on the matters discussed in executive session. And we do take a vote here, whichever way it may be. And then next item 10 is, again, we set the meeting for the next board meeting, and finally the adjournment. Okay, next slide.
So on this one, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up, but before we do wrap up, I wanna read this this portion. So student outcomes don't change until behaviors change. And as of that, if there's any questions from any community members or anyone on this panel pertaining to the presentation, si hay preguntas que quiera preguntar sobre la presentación, se les hace la invitación a este tiempo.
Are we missing something on the statement, adults, or
Until adult behaviors change.
was there a change and I wasn't aware of it?
No, it is adult behavior change.
Missing adult.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we are missing the adult.
I'm sorry. I read it how it was there.
I thought I missed something and I was like, oh.
And it's supposed to read until adult behavior change. Cualquier pregunta ahora se le invita, or whatever questions you may have pertaining to the training. Okay, Ms. Lico.
Okay. So then we would like to thank you for attending and actively participating in this training. It's always a joy when we get to converse and share with our stakeholders what we are doing as your elected Board of Trustees. We are the vision and values of our community and you, and it's wonderful when we have home, school, and community actively collaborating and improving our student outcome goals with our children so our children can thrive and succeed. Reminder that please next Wednesday, the 27th, we will have this training in Spanish from 9 a.m. to 10:30. If you all can join us. And again, these are some pictures of our journey. You know, our students have participated, or we've had LSG students. Thank you, Ms. Haloma, for being such an amazing coach and holding our hand through this process. Mr. Crable, who's excellent in getting us to where we need to be and helping us shift our mindset and our focus on where we should be spending our time, and that is on our students. And we have done a great job. Dr. Mesa Chavez and our whole district, we have done great things in our district, and I see us moving forward wonderfully. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we go, we do have a question from a community member. So the question is if the target is going to change. Si el porcentaje cambiará.
Sí puede cambiar si llegamos a esa meta y la sobrepasamos, sí cambiaría. O sea, siendo que tendríamos que sobrepasar esa meta y ponerla más en alto, porque nuestros niños, claro, queremos que siempre sobresalgan. In English, anybody?
Ms. Licon, I'd like to also add, también puede cambiar la meta si se tiene que hacer un cambio a referencia por la situación que estamos ahorita. La situación puede cambiar o el distrito puede reevaluar la meta porque sabemos que algunos alumnos a lo mejor ahorita el aprendizaje que se está tomando a cabo puede ser un poquito más difícil y tenemos que ver al empezar el año. El Estado nos está dando la oportunidad de darles pruebas al empezar el año para ver cómo es que están nuestros alumnos y de allí a lo mejor hacer esos cambios a las metas como vayan saliendo los resultados de las pruebas estatales que nos están dando para ver cómo van empezando nuestros alumnos. Nomás quería agregar. Thank you, Dr. Mesa.
Thank you. Any more questions? Comments? No? Okay, then we just said, final item is to adjourn. If I may have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion that we adjourn at 10:16.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Mrs. Enriquez, seconded by Ms. Hernandez. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Then motion carries. Thank you and see you all next week.
Thank you so much. I always love getting to spend time with you all. You're an amazing community, an amazing group of leaders. So thank you for including me.
Thank you.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.